The brutal truth about your financial life does not lie in what you do between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. The reason you might feel trapped in an invisible cycle of financial anxiety, the reason the middle class is currently being crushed by the relentless economic pressures of 2026, comes down to a very specific window of time. It is the time when the sun goes down. Most people, the 99%, finish their grueling 8-hour workday completely exhausted. They return home, collapse onto the couch, and immediately reach for their glowing screens. They scroll through endless feeds of bad news, panicking over inflation reports, checking their dwindling stock portfolios, and desperately searching for a quick way out of the financial trap. They bring the chaos of the market, the anxiety of the economy, right into their living rooms, poisoning their resting hours.
Educational and historical content only, not financial advice.
But history tells a very different story. Every evening, exactly as the clock struck 5 p.m., the wealthiest man in American history, John D. Rockefeller, performed a very strange, almost mechanical ritual. He did not stay late at the office to squeeze out a few more dollars from his empire. He did not frantically check the evening financial ledgers, and he certainly did not discuss the fluctuating price of oil with his family over dinner. Instead, he executed a deliberate psychological disconnect, an impenetrable mental firewall that completely shielded his mind from the noise of the outside world. This was not just a quirky habit of a billionaire. It was a deeply guarded secret of old money, a secret ritual that protected the Rockefeller empire through banking panics, devastating world wars, and the Great Depression itself. We are currently living in a defining moment in economic history. The year 2026 has brought unprecedented market volatility, a silent wealth transfer that is quietly wiping out the purchasing power and savings of millions of ordinary people. The middle class has been sold a dangerous, comforting lie. The lie that if you just work harder, if you just put in more hours at your corporate job, if you just hustle a little bit more, you will eventually reach financial freedom. But hard work during the day is simply no longer enough to protect your wealth. The real wealth gap, the invisible chasm separating the elite from everyone else, is not widened under the bright fluorescent lights of the office. It is forged in the deep silence of the evening, from 5 p.m. to midnight. While the masses use their evenings to either escape reality through cheap entertainment or drown in financial anxiety, the top 1% use this exact same time to construct an absolute fortress around their minds. They understand a fundamental law of the universe. Money is gathered during the day, but power, clarity, and generational wealth are secured in the dark. If you are watching this in April of 2026, the historical strategies you are about to hear are not just interesting facts from the Gilded Age. They are an absolute survival guide for the coming months. Tonight, we are going to unlock the vault. We will reveal the 5 evening rules of the financial elite, the exact psychological mechanisms they use to detach from destructive emotions, starve themselves of toxic information, and set up massive asymmetric advantages for the morning. By the end of this revelation, you will clearly understand why the decisions you make after 5 p.m. today will dictate whether you survive this ruthless economic cycle or become just another forgotten casualty of it. Prepare yourself. Welcome to the invisible architecture of old money. The modern evening has become a silent, exhausting psychological battlefield. For the vast majority of the middle class, the corporate workday never truly ends. When the clock hits 5 p.m., they may pack up their physical belongings and leave the office building, but they carry the heavy, invisible weight of financial anxiety right through their front doors. They sit at the family dinner table, physically present, but mentally trapped in an endless labyrinth of unpaid bills, rising grocery prices, and the creeping, undeniable threat of economic recession in 2026. They turn their quiet living rooms into secondary boardrooms, endlessly discussing how to stretch their diminishing paychecks, arguing over expenses, and allowing the stress of survival to poison their sanctuary. This is not just a bad habit. It is a fatal financial error. John D. Rockefeller, a man who controlled a staggering percentage of the American economy, understood something profound about the human mind. He instituted an absolute, unbreakable rule within his vast estates. The precise moment he stepped away from his desk, a psychological firewall was immediately erected. There was to be zero discussion of business operations, zero mention of the fluctuating prices of Standard Oil, and absolutely zero talk of money during his evening hours. He demanded complete and total emotional detachment from the machine of wealth creation. Why was this extreme boundary so crucial to his success? The answer lies in the biology of stress. When you bring financial panic into your resting space, your brain is continuously flooded with cortisol, the primary stress hormone. This constant state of low-level, simmering panic slowly eats away at your prefrontal cortex, the exact part of your brain responsible for logical, long-term strategic thinking. By obsessing over your lack of wealth at night, by dwelling on your financial insecurities, you are quite literally draining the mental bandwidth that is absolutely required to generate wealth the following morning. Rockefeller did not shut off his calculating business mind because he was lazy or because he did not care. He shut it off because he was fiercely protecting his most valuable compounding asset, his cognitive capacity. He knew that to conquer the ruthless markets tomorrow, he had to completely surrender to the silence tonight. He mastered the elite art of being entirely unreachable. But simply detaching from the daily grind of work is only the first layer of this invisible architecture. The second habit of the elite is perhaps the single most critical survival skill you can possibly adopt in the chaotic, unpredictable economic climate of 2026. It is the rigorous practice of the absolute information fast. Right now, at this very moment, millions of amateur retail investors are lying in bed, staring blankly into the harsh, artificial blue light of their smartphones. They are endlessly refreshing cryptocurrency charts, reading apocalyptic predictions about the coming stock market crash, and absorbing a relentless, toxic stream of negative macroeconomic news. They falsely believe that by staying constantly informed, by consuming every piece of data available, they are somehow staying safe. This is a devastating and costly illusion. The true financial elite, the titans of old money who have survived multiple depressions and market collapses, practice strategic blindness after dark. Rockefeller famously ignored the evening newspapers, completely avoiding the frantic headlines, especially during times of immense market panic and public hysteria. He intuitively understood that evening information is not designed to educate you. It is fundamentally engineered to trigger your amygdala, the primal fear center of your brain. It is crafted by media conglomerates to keep you hooked, anxious, and highly reactive. When you consume toxic, fear-inducing financial data right before you go to sleep, you are actively planting seeds of panic deep into your subconscious mind. Your brain processes this fear all night long, churning through worst-case scenarios while you dream. And when you finally wake up, your decision-making mechanism is completely compromised. You sell your hard-earned assets at the exact wrong time. You make impulsive, emotional investments born out of pure desperation, and you fall perfectly into the traps laid out by institutional investors who prey on retail panic. The ultra-wealthy do not play this dangerous game. They know that late-night information is rarely actionable. It is only emotional poison. By enforcing a strict, uncompromising information diet after 5 p.m., they starve the fear, and they perfectly preserve their cold, calculating logic. They gladly let the uninformed masses panic in the dark while they rest deeply, waking up with absolute clarity, ready to buy up all the undervalued assets when the sun finally rises. There is a legendary artifact in the dark history of American capitalism. It was a simple, unassuming red ledger, kept faithfully by John D. Rockefeller himself. Most people naturally assume that a ruthless billionaire uses his evenings to count his money, to tally up his daily profits, and to obsess over the exact net worth of his sprawling empire. But Rockefeller used this small red book for something entirely different. He called it his daily accounting, but it was not an accounting of dollars and cents. It was a brutal, uncompromising accounting of his own psychology. He performed what can only be described as a nightly soul audit. Every single night, in the absolute silence of his private study, he reviewed his actions of the day with the cold, clinical detachment of a forensic investigator? Did he let pride dictate a business negotiation? Did he allow a momentary flash of greed to cloud his long-term judgment? Well, did he speak too much and listen too little? The 99% spend their evenings justifying their mistakes, complaining about their bosses, and making endless excuses for why they are not wealthy. They use the night to feed their fragile egos. But the top 1% use the evening to ruthlessly assassinate their own egos. When you look at the economic turmoil of 2026, you see a world driven by pure emotion. People are angry at inflation, terrified of losing their jobs, and desperately searching for someone to blame. But the market is an emotionless machine. To conquer the machine, you must learn to observe your own flaws without flinching. By conducting this psychological audit before turning off the lights, Rockefeller effectively wiped his mental slate clean. He neutralized his own destructive biases. He ensured that when he woke up the next morning, he was not carrying the heavy, toxic baggage of yesterday's arrogance or yesterday's fear. This quiet practice is the invisible armor of old money. It allows them to remain terrifyingly calm when everyone else is losing their minds. As the evening deepens, the middle class falls victim to another devastating financial disease. It is a modern plague that is actively destroying the wealth of millions today. We call it the status trap. After a grueling day of selling their time for money, the average person feels completely depleted. They desperately seek a quick hit of dopamine to feel alive again. So they open their devices. They scroll through curated images of fake wealth, luxury vacations, and brand new cars. And then, in the quiet hours of the night, the bleeding begins. They start spending. They buy things they do not need, with money they do not have, to impress people they do not even like. The evening hours are the exact time when the invisible algorithms of the internet drain the bank accounts of the working class. The status trap is a highly engineered illusion. It is specifically designed to keep you trapped on the endless hamster wheel of labor. If the system can convince you that your personal worth is tied to the labels you wear or the car parked in your driveway, then the system owns you forever. You will wake up every single day, trade your irreplaceable time for a depreciating fiat currency, and hand it right back to the mega corporations before you go to sleep. But if you look at the evening habits of the Rockefeller family and the true titans of old money, you will find the exact opposite behavior. They do not use their evenings to consume. They use their evenings to disappear. They practice the art of strategic invisibility, while the new rich are out at lavish parties, desperately trying to prove their newfound wealth to the world. The old money elite retreat into absolute privacy. They understand that seeking status is a massive liability. It attracts envy. It invites unnecessary risk, and most importantly, it wastes precious time and energy. Instead of seeking external validation, they turn their focus entirely inward. Their evenings are dedicated to dynastic discipline. They read history. They study the rise and fall of ancient civilizations, and they teach their children the exact principles required to protect the family fortune from the notorious three-generation curse. They know that true power does not need to shout. True power is perfectly silent. By refusing to play the status game, by becoming virtually invisible after dark, they protect their empire from the greatest threat of all, their own vanity. The defining difference between those who remain perpetually trapped in the middle class and those who ascend to the elite 1% becomes blindingly obvious in the way they approach the concept of tomorrow. The average person spends their evening dreading the next morning. They lie awake, paralyzed by a low-frequency anxiety over an endless list of trivial tasks, answering emails, attending useless corporate meetings, and attempting to please bosses who view them as entirely replaceable assets. They wake up completely reactive to the world around them. But the titans of old money, they do not react to the future. They meticulously arrange it. This brings us to the fourth hidden habit of the elite evening, the concept of the asymmetric setup. When John D. Rockefeller finished his day, he did not leave a chaotic desk behind him. He did not leave his morning vulnerable to random distractions or emotional fluctuations. He understood a terrifyingly simple truth. Human willpower is a highly finite, rapidly depleting resource. If you wake up and have to decide what you need to do, you have already lost the game. Your cognitive energy is immediately drained by the friction of decision-making. Instead, the elite use a tiny, hyper-focused fraction of their evening to identify their $20,000 touch point. This is the single, highly leveraged action that will generate massive asymmetric returns the following day. They completely ignore the $10 tasks that keep the middle class deceptively busy. They clear the physical and mental workspace. They lay out the exact documents, the specific strategy, the precise move they will execute the very moment their cognitive bandwidth is at its absolute peak the next morning. By doing this, they completely remove the need for motivation. When the sun rises, they do not need to feel inspired. They operate like a ruthless, perfectly calibrated machine. Execution becomes automatic. The environment dictates the behavior, and the environment was engineered the night before. And then, we arrive at the absolute pinnacle of the elite evening, the climax of the invisible architecture, the final 60 minutes before the eyes close. We call this the golden hour. It is the most critical, the most psychologically potent window of the entire 24-hour cycle. In the brutal economic landscape of 2026, as inflation fractures the stability of the working class and panic spreads through the masses, the average person spends their final 60 minutes staring into glowing screens. They bathe their retinas in artificial blue light, injecting their minds with algorithmic noise and digital chaos, right up until the exact second they pass out from sheer cognitive exhaustion. They violently force their brains from a state of hyperstimulation straight into a restless, anxiety-ridden sleep. But the old money elite understand the profound science of human consciousness. In the final 60 minutes of the day, the human brain begins a critical biological transition. It naturally shifts from the fast, active beta waves of the waking day down into the slower, highly receptive alpha and theta waves. This is the exact state where the subconscious mind is most vulnerable and most programmable. The subconscious is an advanced supercomputer, and whatever data you feed it during this golden hour will be processed, amplified, and deeply integrated throughout the entire night. Rockefeller and the financial titans who quietly followed his blueprint guarded this golden hour with their lives. They used this specific time for absolute, unbroken stillness. No business conversations, no strategic planning, no frantic calculations of compounding interest. They entered a state of profound silence, allowing the vast architecture of their empire to settle deeply into their subconscious mind. They did not engage in cheap, modern manifestation techniques. They simply visualized their inevitable dominance with a chilling, completely emotionless certainty. This is the ultimate, unbreakable barrier between new money and old money. New money is loud, anxious, and constantly terrified of losing what they have just managed to build. Old money is calm, perfectly silent, and deeply rooted in the absolute conviction that their empire is inevitable. By mastering the stillness of the golden hour, they actively program their minds to solve complex financial puzzles while they sleep. They wake up with sudden flashes of brilliance, intuitive leaps of flawless logic that the struggling middle class mistakenly attributes to pure luck or genetic genius. It is never luck. It is the deliberate result of a perfectly protected, meticulously engineered psychological ecosystem, an ecosystem built entirely in the dark. The year 2026 is not just another chapter in economic history. It is a brutal, unforgiving crucible. The greatest wealth transfer of our generation is happening right now, in the shadows, while the majority of the world is distracted by fear and cheap entertainment. The middle class is being systematically hollowed out by inflation, unpredictable markets, and an elite class that knows exactly how to exploit human psychology. But now, you know their secret. You hold the blueprint of the invisible architecture. The choice you make tonight, exactly at 5 p.m., will determine your financial destiny for the next decade. Will you continue to bring the panic of the outside world into your sanctuary? Will you keep scrolling through endless feeds of toxic information until your cognitive bandwidth is completely exhausted? Or will you choose the path of the old money elite? Will you erect the psychological firewall, starve the fear, and master the profound power of the golden hour? Your empire begins or ends when the sun goes down. If you want to survive the ruthless economic cycles of 2026 and learn the deeply guarded historical secrets of the 1%, you must protect your mind. Subscribe to Mindset for Wealth right now. We are dedicated to decoding the true history of money and giving you the exact psychological armor you need to escape the modern financial trap. Do not let the elite win in the dark. Subscribe to Mindset for Wealth today, and we will see you in the next revelation.